Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our live announcement with Richard Dawkins. We're so happy to see you here. We have a very exciting announcement for everyone. I'm Taryn Southern, and I've been fortunate to get to host a monthly Q&A with Richard over the past year on his YouTube channel and on his social media channels. And now we're going to be announcing this exclusive update to all of you. But I do want to wait until we get a little more people into the room first. So, Richard, how are you doing?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing very well. I just had a busy morning and I'm excited to be here with you for this announcement. I couldn't believe it myself when I looked over the documentation. Are you ready for something of this
I think so,
magnitude?
yes. It's a wonderful spring day here, and it's a pity to be indoors, but anyway, I hope we'll have a good time.
We'll definitely have a great time. And I want everyone to be sure to get ready. Today we're going to be making this announcement, but also having a live Q&A session. So you'll be able to stick around until 12:45 Eastern or 5:45 p.m. British Standard Time with your questions. So go ahead and come on in. So I think now that we're a few minutes in, we can proceed with the very special announcement. So Richard, would you like to do the honors and let everyone know what they can be expecting from you this year?
Okay, it's not that exciting.
Very exciting.
I'm doing a tour, a book tour to promote my latest book, which is called The Genetic Book of the Dead. Um, in North America during most of September and the early part of October, and then moving to Britain, the Low Countries, Belgium and Holland, and then Ireland in late October and early November. The book, The Genetic Book of the Dead, is aimed at the same audience as The Selfish Gene, but it's a very different book. It's not a new edition of the same book, but it's aimed at the same audience at about the same length, and it is illustrated. Full details of the tour are on the website richarddawkinstour.com. That's richarddawkinstour.com without any spaces there. Briefly, I'll be speaking in this order in Dallas, Austin, Newark, Washington, D.C., Boston, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Chicago, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and ending up in Vancouver. And then moving to Britain, first Oxford, then Coventry, London, Cambridge, Glasgow, Salford, then moving to the Low Countries, Antwerp, Amsterdam, then to Ireland, Dublin, and Belfast. So that's rather a lot of touring, rather a lot of traveling for me. The full program with the names of all the theatres is in that website, richarddawkinstour.com. And you can sign up for tickets there. And I hope to see you there.
Yes, pre-sale links will actually go live after our conversation, and that pre-sale link will give you access to tickets for the April 19th sale. So some of the venues are small. You'll want to sign up early to get the pre-sale link. So go ahead and go to that website now if you're hoping to make it to any of those cities. Richard, let's talk for a second about the format of the tour. For those who've never had a chance or an opportunity to see you live, what can they expect?
Well, the way I do it nowadays is normally I get interviewed by a local person, maybe a professor at the local university, maybe a journalist, who we hope has read the book and who asks me questions about it. And then we usually have quite a long time for Q&A, which I enjoy. And it's an opportunity for people to ask questions about what they've heard in the talk or anything else, actually, about any of my books. And then usually there's a book signing.
That's right. So it's my understanding it'll be roughly a 1 hour conversation with a friend or a local journalist. I do think, and I don't want to raise expectations too high, but I think there will be some interesting friends of Richard Dawkins that may accompany some of the city stops.
Well, maybe enemies too. I'm not sure about that, whether they'll all be friends or not.
I'm aware of potentially some enemies. Let's just say things could
Yes.
get very interesting.
Yes.
You don't want to miss those. And so after the hour-long conversation with the friend or frenemy or enemy, then there will be a Q&A, interactive Q&A live with the audience. And of course, you don't want to miss that. This is a huge tour. I can't believe you're traveling this much in the span of just a couple
I can't
of
either. No, I don't know how it's happened.
I know. I hope you have jet lag, that you don't have issues with jet lag.
I'm not too bad on jet lag. I'm pretty insomniac at the best of times, and so jet lag doesn't make that much difference to me.
I get it. Well, you have one of your fans here that's hoping to see pole dancing happen during one of the Q&As, so you just never know how weird things will get when Richard is.
Yes.
When Richard's super jet lagged, you never know.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about the book. This is books like The Selfish Gene, The God Delusion, Unweaving Rainbow have earned you millions of admirers through your passion for the wonders of science and the vital importance of reason. How do you think this book, I suppose, will compare to some of these other books?
Well, it's a biology book. It's about evolution. The subtitle is A Darwinian Reverie, and it begins with the main thesis, which is that the animal is a book. You are a book. We are a book. I am a book. A description, a detailed description of the ancient worlds in which our ancestors were naturally selected. It's all there. It's just that present day science isn't equipped to unravel it. But my conceit is that there will be zoologists of the future will be able to read the animal and reconstruct all the worlds in which its ancestors survived to become ancestors and pass on the genes that are inherited by the modern animals. And so that's the outline of the first chapter. And the second chapter looks at camouflaged animals, which have their ancestral environment actually more or less painted on their back. I mean, a desert lizard, for example, has stones and sand painted on its back. That's just the superficial example of what I'm talking about. But the same principle must apply right the way through. Every bit of the animal, every detail of the interior of the animal must be as beautifully painted, but not in an obvious way. It won't look like the environment. It will be interpretable as the environment to a sufficiently expert observer. And then there are chapters later on convergent evolution, divergent evolution. There's a chapter on cuckoos as an example of genes looking back at their past history. Another chapter on genes looking back at their past history. It ends with a sort of sting in the tail, which is a speculation that we can regard all our own genes, what we call our own genes, the genes of our actual genome, are a gigantic colony of viruses. And that's not quite as startling as it sounds, but that's kind of what the sting in the tail of the book is.
I love that. And just to get everyone excited, we have a number of quotes from incredible authors who've already had a chance to read the book. So I'd love to just share a few of those now. Steven Pinker wrote that the book is overflowing with the beauty of nature, the beauty of language, and the beauty of ideas. Nick Davies' review says it is dazzling in originality and scope with beautiful illustrations. This is a wonderful celebration of the power of natural selection. Richard Dawkins reveals with brilliant clarity the imprint on organisms of their evolutionary past. And one more that I'll read by Jerry A. Coyne writes, written with typical verve and panache, Richard Dawkins' The Genetic Book of the Dead makes a brilliant contribution to the public understanding of evolution using our most up-to-date understanding of genetics. It will enthrall, surprise, and challenge you. Read it. And on that last quote, I wanted to actually ask, is there anything in particular that made it into this book that may not have made it into previous books that you feel surprised you, Richard, given the most up-to-date understanding of evolution and genetics?
I suppose the last thing I mentioned, which is this rather presumptuous speculation about our own genome being a colony of viruses. I don't actually mean that they're viruses that came in from the cold, so to speak. Some of them are, actually, quite a lot of them are. But that's not what I'm talking about. The point is that any parasite or symbiont which has as its exit route to the future the gametes of the host will automatically become more or less indistinguishable from the animal's own genes because they have exactly the same interests at heart. If you think about a parasite, say a bacterium or a virus, which passes, instead of being sneezed into the atmosphere and breathed in, which is what we think of as viruses, any virus which goes to the next generation of the host in the egg, for example, will have identical interests to the mother who is reproducing. Everything about it, the courtship display of the mother, the parental behavior of the mother, everything she does, her survival strategies, everything will be the virus will have exactly the same interest in fostering that, what I call the extended phenotype. Is one of my previous books. There's another chapter on that, by the way. I should have mentioned that there is a chapter replying to criticisms of the selfish gene, notably criticisms by my colleague, Professor Dennis Noble, which a number of people have asked me to respond to. And so I respond to his criticisms and others, by, for example, Stephen Jay Gould and others.
That will be fun to read, I think, because all of us go in with our various questions and thoughts on these subjects, but to also see your brain work off of these criticisms and respond to them will be an added bonus, I'm sure, for readers. We are getting some questions in the chat, Richard, so I'd love to pose a few of those, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back for more questions. So one of the questions says, Professor Dawkins, how relevant do you feel your eminent work, The Selfish Gene, is today in contemporary society and conversations about human nature as tangent of the book?
Yes, I've never been that interested in human nature. I know most people are, I suppose understandably enough, because we are human. I don't take any of it back, by the way. I think the selfish gene, I feel I ought to take some of it back because scientists actually gain prestige if they could stand up and say I was wrong. And in a way, I wish I could do that, but I can't. I think it's the fundamental thesis of the selfish gene is actually correct. So I'm not recanting any of it. I suppose you're asking about the relevance to humanity, to humans. Those are the parts that have been much misunderstood. It's misunderstood as being a genetic determinism book, as advocating the view that we are slaves to our genes and nothing we can do to alter what our genes program into us. It's not about that at all. It's not a book about embryology. It's a book about evolution. And so it's about the natural selection of genes. The idea is the selfish gene is the unit of natural selection. And as a Darwinian, I don't retreat, I don't recant from that at all. So it's not about selfishness. It's not an advocacy of selfishness. It's not saying we are selfish or should be selfish. It's saying that genes are selfish. And we are programmed to be altruistic by our selfish genes, for example. And that, as I say, remains the same. There's been an awful lot has happened in the 40-odd years since The Selfish Gene was published, of course, and the science of genomics has advanced by leaps and bounds. And that's all very, very exciting, but it doesn't affect the fundamental Darwinian thesis of the book.
That's great. We have another great question here from Kathy Morellis actually, I don't know where she's from, but she says, Professor Dawkins, can you give any advice on how to stay hopeful in this current world full of so much superstition and delusion?
Yes, well, superstition and delusion is not the only problem we're facing at the moment. Of course, we've got a couple of wars going on, which is very worrying. And we have climate change, we have pandemics. I suppose I'm constitutionally optimistic while I'm intellectually pessimistic. I think you have to live your life hopeful. You have to live your life as if it's going to get better. Things are going to get better. I get encouragement from the books by people like Steven Pinker and Matt Ridley and Michael Shermer, who take a rather optimistic view. There's a sort of clicking going on. Is that me or
sorry, that is me. I'm typing in our private chat. But now that you can hear it,
sorry. Okay.
yeah,
okay.
No, you're fine.
So I think we have to be optimistic as far as we can, while recognizing that the world is in a rather desperate state. Nevertheless, let's try to look on the bright side. Those books I mentioned by Steve Pinker and Matt Ridley and Michael Shermer look at history and make the point that we are getting better as the centuries go by. I mean, humans used to be truly horrible in medieval times and earlier than that, with public executions, which were a great spectacle that people would enjoy going to. Burning cats was a great sport. We don't do that sort of thing anymore. We've become much more civilized. That goes, I mean, I recommend those books if you want a bit of optimism. I want to mute myself while I clear my throat. Hang on, I'll do that.
Wonderful. And this is actually a great time for us to take a break. We have a teaser for all of you on the tour. So we'll be back in just a minute or two, and we'll go ahead and roll the teaser.
The world's most famous atheist and recently ranked the world's most influential thinker, Professor Richard Dawkins.
Science works. Planes fly. Magic carpets and broomsticks don't. Gravity is not a version of the truth. It is the truth.
Whether or not a God exists is actually a scientific question.
I'm prepared to call you she if you like, but to say I am a woman is a debauching of language, and that's where I draw the line.
I'm excited. That got me pumped. Oop, you're muted, Richard. Just click the unmute button.
I hadn't seen that film before, so it was a bit of a shock to see it.
Well, I'm ready for the LA one. I'll be there. I'll be there in line.
Oh, great, good. You can ask the first question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions coming in from Q&A. We'll have about 20 minutes to answer them. So I'll go ahead and jump right back in. And if anyone has specific questions as well about the tour, please let us know. I also failed to mention that for anyone who purchases the pre-sale tickets, will be given the opportunity for a special edition version of the book that is signed by Richard and has a bonus page in it. So if you want to be the lucky owner of this special book, you'll need to purchase your ticket via the pre-sale option. Just another reason to go to that link and sign up so that you're notified as soon as those go on sale. Okay, so moving into the questions, there were a lot here. Let's start with one that is very near and dear to my heart. This is from Avatar Guys, and he wants to know, Richard, do you believe that recent developments in AI will unlock further insights into evolutionary biology? Will we see a new field of evolutionary AI study?
I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I have tested two of the well-known AI programs, ChatGPT and Gemini, I think it's called. I was bowled over, impressed by how they appear to be human. I mean, they really, really do fool you into thinking that they're alive, thinking that they're conscious. I almost can't persuade myself that they're not. Of course, I know intellectually that they're not, but it's hard for me to persuade myself that they're not. Factual knowledge, less impressive. I mean, I think I've told this story before, that I mentioned to ChatGPT the name of a geneticist called Helen Spurway, who died quite a long time ago, and she would be about 100 by now, I think. And it said she married J.B.S. Haldane. It said after Haldane died, she married Richard Dawkins. Well, I said, well, no, she didn't. And so ChatGPT said, oh, sorry, we got that wrong. She married Aldous Huxley. Well, she didn't marry Aldous Huxley either. So in terms of factual knowledge, Google is much better. But in terms of simulation of a human conscious intelligence, a human person, I think it's just marvelous, amazing.
Amazing. I love that. Another question a bit related to this was from Luis Guerrero. And this question says, is consciousness a brain state which is a result of particular parts of the brain communicating with each other?
I don't think anybody knows what consciousness is. It clearly is something to do with brain states. And the idea that it's different parts of the brain communicating with each other sounds to me to be interestingly plausible, along with various other things. So yes, that sounds like a good idea to pursue. And I'm not in a position to pursue it myself, but no doubt the questioner is, and perhaps she or he will write a book about it.
Okay, here's a great question from Ollie. This is one that I feel has captured a lot of attention and conversation in the zeitgeist right now. The question says, Dr. Dawkins, do you believe technological progress, for example, genetic engineering or solving aging, will eventually make natural selection irrelevant to our species?
Well, that is a possibility. Remember that natural selection is all about reproduction. It's not only about survival. Survival is only a step towards reproduction. And so if aging was abolished and people just sort of lived until they died of an accident, so if there was never any dying of old age and people could live indefinitely, then presumably we'd have to stop reproducing or reproduce at a much lower rate because the carrying capacity of the Earth is finite. And so natural selection, I suppose, would stop, if only because there'd been not very much reproduction. It doesn't seem to be likely to happen in the near future. It is true that great strides are being made in finding cures for cancer. There's no one miracle cure for cancer, but each of the separate kinds of cancer is slowly succumbing to medical science. And so the chances are that we're all going to live, not all of us, many of us are going to live a great deal longer than our grandparents did. And it is sometimes said that will bring natural selection to an end. So far, I think there's no sign of that. But it's an interesting and rather disturbing thought, actually. Whether it's something we should welcome or not.
And I suppose in this vein, a question from Either Spark. asks, what field do you think the next life-changing scientific discovery will be in?
It would be nice to think the next life-changing discovery will be in physics, will be the discovery of a theory of everything, and the long sought for unification of quantum theory and relativity, and finally understanding everything. And scientists differ in whether they think that's possible or whether there'll always be further horizons to conquer. But physics is not my field. In biology, it's clear that what's going on at the moment is going to continue, which is the enormous strides in molecular biology. And what's happening there is that it's getting cheaper and cheaper and faster to sequence DNA. And so, for example, in evolution, it's going to become routine to sequence any animal you find to get a complete genome of it in a matter of hours. And so that should make it possible to construct a complete pedigree of all life, whole family history of all life. Medical science will be revolutionized when doctors have the genome of every patient, not just a sort of tiny fraction of the genome like 23andMe, but the whole genome. And instead of prescribing a remedy for a sort of generic remedy for everybody who's got the particular disease, it will be a different remedy, a different prescription for each person depending upon their genome. And so that's going to be a major advance resulting from molecular genetics. We've already seen the impact of molecular genetics in the speed with which the vaccines for COVID were developed. This was possible because the genome of the virus was sequenced almost immediately and published. And so the genome was available to vaccine developers all over the world, and 3 or 4 of them stepped forward and produced a vaccine in remarkably short time because they had the sequence of the virus's genome.
So incredible. We have another question related to modern medicine, so I'll ask that one. It's from David Pearson. He says, given that modern medicine keeps many individuals alive who would not normally live to reproduce in a state of nature, should we expect the quality of the human gene pool to deteriorate over time?
Yes, that's very similar to the previous question.
Yes.
I suppose inevitably you have to say yes to that. I don't want to say that's a bad thing. I mean, in one respect, it is a bad thing, I suppose. But I like medical science. I like doctors. And I think it's a price well worth paying.
We have a philosophical question from Art Murat. And the question is, if it were possible medically, would you take immortality? Or would you prefer to die at one point in fear of not knowing how to endure eternity as a human being?
Eternity is very frightening, I think, and that's the only thing that's really frightening about well, not death, because of course death is the way of escaping from eternity. I wouldn't go for eternity. I might go for 200 years, perhaps. I'd be curious to know what's going to happen. Even better, perhaps, would be to go into a hibernation for a couple of 100 years and keep coming back once a century and see how things are developing.
That would keep things pretty interesting, for sure.
Yeah. I'm not sure. It might be rather depressing, actually. I mean, you sort of, the language would change. You wouldn't be able to speak to people after a few centuries.
That's true, and you never know when you emerge and become the next lab rat either.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from McKite. It says, we've heard Professor Dawkins attack traditional religion. What are your views on the new woke postmodern religion and the relentless compromise of the scientific enterprise? For example, thoughts on teachings about meditation.
Teaching about what?
Teachings about meditation or spirituality. Yeah.
I don't know much about that. I'll talk to Sam Harris about that. Yes, I'm often accused I mean, people like me who've been attacking traditional religion, that we've made way for something worse. And the religion that says that a woman is anybody who feels like calling themselves a woman. A man is anybody, whatever anybody thinks. If they are a man, they can call themselves a man. You can talk about women with penises and things. I'm against that. I'm a biologist, and I think the definition of the sexes is absolutely clear. I've written about this. I hope in a sensible, moderate, responsible way. The definition of the sexes is absolutely, the biological definition of the sex is absolutely clear. It's based on gamete size, and there are no intermediates at all. You are either you either have a body that is equipped to make microgametes or that's equipped to make macrogametes, and that is the definition of sex, and that's that as far as I'm concerned. So postmodernism, I've never managed to get out of anybody a definition of what postmodernism actually is, and that I think is pretty much sums up how little there is to it if people can't even define what it is. It seems to be anti-scientific. It seems to have a kind of hubristic view that humanity can define what the truth is, rather than objective, the real world defining what the truth is. And obviously, as a scientist, I'm against that. There's also a kind of bullying, hectoring aspect to it, attacking people who disagree with you rather than arguing with them in a sober, rational way.
All true. We have some interesting sort of questions coming in around other topics, so I might jump into one of them. One is from Joe Brown, and he says, Dr. Dawkins, how do you feel about the plummeting birth rates in the developed world?
That's very interesting, because when I was younger, we all had to worry about rising birth rates and a rising population, and there were all sorts of dire predictions of the world becoming totally overpopulated and people starving and going to war over commodities and things. And now it's rather as though the tables are turned, and we're now worrying about plummeting birth rates, at least in parts of the world. And I find it rather interesting the way these things that we have to worry about change. It is a rather remarkable thing, the way that has changed. In the Western world, birth rates are plummeting, and it's not entirely clear. I mean, in some cases, not entirely clear why.
There was another one related to this, but there's so many questions here. I will hop into another one and then come back to the birth rates. One is from Atheism with Science. Dr. Dawkins, what was the main reason that the human brain stopped evolving years ago?
Well, I'm not sure it stopped evolving exactly. Remember that evolution is a very slow process by comparison to the human lifetime, and so we look back at the fossil record and we see that 3 million years ago, our ancestors were probably a member of the genus Australopithecus, who had brains not that much different from a chimpanzee. And so in 3 million years, not as a steady increase, but perhaps by fits and starts, the brain has really increased very rapidly. And I'm not sure whether you can say it stopped. I mean, stopped is sort of relative to the timescale that you're thinking about. If you mean, if we go 3 million years into the future, will it get even bigger still? Probably not. I mean, in order for that to happen, there has to be natural selection in favor of bigger brains. And there's no reason to suppose that there's any reproductive advantage to having a big brain. When survival was at a premium, in order to reproduce, you had to survive. Now, most people survive, and so but whether you reproduce is a matter of choice and things like that. And there's no evidence that brainy individuals have more children than less brainy individuals. Which would have to be the case in order for the brain to get bigger, and that in some sense that must have been the case during the 3 million years when the brain was getting bigger. It must have been the case that natural selection was favoring big brains, which had to mean that those individuals with bigger brains survived better, or at least had more children, probably survived better to have more children. And of course, there's no reason to suppose that that is the case anymore.
Sure. There was a little bit of that where you were going in and out, but now I think your voice is good. If anyone in the chat is having trouble, you're good now. If anyone in the chat is having trouble hearing Mr. Dawkins, please just let us know. And we have a question here from Chester McGreer, who asks, Ray Kurzweil once said, "Does God exist? Not yet. Do you believe it is possible that AI could become God-like over time?"
That is very interesting. Becoming godlike is certainly a great possibility, not just for AI, but probably for alien life elsewhere in the universe. I think it's highly probable that there is life elsewhere in the universe, and highly probable that some of it at least will be so far advanced compared to us that we would think of them as godlike. But godlike is very different from being God. Godlike is still a product of evolution, still a product of incremental, step-by-step evolution, whereas God, the gods of religions, are eternal. They've always existed. They've always been there. They are not evolved, and that's what I really object to. So I would strongly object to using the word God for an alien being, however advanced, however godlike that alien being might be, because it would not have just happened to be there. It would have evolved by an incremental process. Either it evolved, or it's an artifactual product, which is what AI would be, of an evolutionary process. Martin Rees, the astronomer royal, has suggested that if we ever do make contact with alien life, it'll very probably not be biological at all, but artificial, because the chances are that any life form is going to persist in its AI form, in the form of its artifactual products, rather than in the form of the biology that produced them. So he's in effect suggesting that we will go extinct, but will be survived by our artificial robot products, and the same would be true of alien life. The time span of an alien intelligence, biological intelligence, might be short compared to the time span of the robotic products of that biological intelligence.
I mean, it's a fun thought process to think, maybe we are some form of artificial intelligence that took a biological form for efficiency, for computational efficiency. Our brains run off of the energy of a banana, whereas some of our other alien friends might have taken other more computationally efficient forms.
Yes, you're not. Are you suggesting that we are a simulation? That has been suggested.
It's a suggested theory. It's certainly not something that I would say.
I rather like the idea. I mean, it seems to be quite hard to disprove. I mean, I first encountered it in a rather good science fiction novel called what is it called? Counterfeit World by Daniel F. Galloy, where it turns out that we humans are actually in a simulation. And anyway, all sorts of adventures follow from that.
Yes, and because I work in AI, so a lot of the conversation that's happening right now is how do we increase computation? How do we decrease energy usage? So we're essentially looking at similar properties of evolution. We want more efficiency, more computation with more efficiency. So looking at different substrates to move computation into. And so this also kind of goes back to the question around, will our future AI be God-like? And we now live in a world where the youngest generation is being born in a time and space where molecules can be engineered, where atoms can be engineered, where
Yes.
AI can pump out human creativity in ways that human-like creativity in quite
It's
mind-blowing.
immensely exciting. I mean, one of the reasons I regret being old is that I shan't live to see these developments. And I think it is very exciting. What I'd like to ask you though is, it puzzles me the way my understanding of how these very clever AI programs work is totally different from the way, obviously, the brain works. It seems to be a gathering together of enormous quantities of data, of things that have been said, and somehow putting it all together in a form that is read out as though it was an intelligent person speaking. And that's quite different from the way the brain works. And yet the end result is uncannily similar.
That's correct. You're absolutely right. I mean, the large language models that really came onto the scene and made a big splash over the past couple of years do think, quote unquote, think differently than the human brain, but they're still remarkably precise. So it's just simply using a different sort of foundational architecture of understanding the world. Now, with the help of Gemini and some of these other tools, which can use visual analysis, we're going to start seeing sort of new networks. There's also a lot of scientists who've been working to build these models based on neural networks, based on the way the brain works.
Yes, well, that's much more biological, of course.
It is. And so there's scientists who've built synthetic neurons and synthetic brains and trying to replicate that process as we think. And it's very possible that those will be the winning AI models of tomorrow. They might be far more efficient, energy efficient.
Okay. You think they will?
I mean, I suppose only time will tell. Right now, the biggest problem that we have is having enough energy to power these models. I mean, they're exceedingly large. So if you have heard about transistor chips and things like that are, exceedingly hard to build, that's all happening over the next 2 to 5 years, I think. We'll have some answers as to whether the large language models or recurrent networks or neural networks will become our future AI on the path to AGI.
Are there any neural network models that I can look up myself to try to compare with the large language models?
I could put you in touch with some labs that are doing research. I'm not sure off of the top of my head, but I could certainly do that. And I think that, the big question that sort of comes out of all of these really powerful advancements is, with young children who are growing up with these technologies, will they have any reason to believe in God when they're already seeing God-like powers from the technology that's in front of them? What will it do to religion over the next few generations to have these technologies that are capable of creating virtually anything you can imagine?
Yes. Yeah.
So that just something to chew on. Let's see here. It's already 12:43, and you have so many questions. So I'll close it off with one more question. I think there are so many great ones, but let's do. I thought this one was a good one. It's just from someone who wants to know. I'm assuming this is from someone who, because they follow you, is not religious, and they want to understand how to better deal with depression, as there must have been a time in your life where you too have felt hopeless. What helps you in the absence of religion?
I am fortunate in that I've never actually suffered from clinical depression. I know many people who have. I would be surprised if religion was the answer to depression. I don't think it's a very good candidate for helping you. I suppose if you're depressed because you're bereaved, you've lost a loved one, I suppose it might be consoling to believe in a fantasy that they are still alive in heaven. So I could imagine it might provide a kind of temporary palliation of depression. I suppose that if you're really clinically depressed, the best thing to do is to go to a shrink, and who will either give you drugs or give you CBT or something. cognitive behavior therapy, which I'm told is in many cases better than drugs.
And might I add, as someone who grew up in a Bible Belt town and converted toward atheism in high school, and also I have a number of friends who also grew up that way and then became secular. One interesting way to combat mental health issues is to look at the rituals and traditions that religion often enable or empower their users to take on, which are helpful towards your mental health, is actually instituting some version of that for yourself. Whether that's exercise or eating well, or meditation or positive affirmations. It's going to look different for every person, but seeing that there's still value in the ritual and in the routine. And there's a lot of groups out there, deconstructive groups, that are very helpful with atheists to help them on that path.
Yes, so you're saying that religions have over the centuries developed these techniques and chanting and saying om and meditation and things. Yes, I suppose that's probably true. Yes.
Yes, and the community, the weekly community get together.
Of course, yes, the community. Yes, yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Richard. This has been a wonderful chat. We're basically at time, but I just want to encourage everyone to go to richarddawkinstour.com for your pre-sale link. Tickets will go on sale on April 19th, but we expect that some of these venues will sell out because they are smaller venues. So you want to make sure you get pre-sale ticket sign up. That will allow you to get a password sometime between April 15th and 19th with a special link. And if you do purchase the tickets on pre-sale, you'll get the special edition book of the Genetic Book of the Dead, which is a signed copy from Dr. Dawkins himself, along with a bonus page. I do not know what's in this special bonus page, but I believe it's a letter from you. So how very exciting. And just be aware that this is the biggest tour that Dr. Dawkins has ever engaged in. And there's sure to be some very interesting people and friends and frenemies along the way. And so I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in Los Angeles.
I look forward to it very much. Thank you very much, Taryn.
Of course. All right. Well, we hope to see you all soon. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Bye-bye.
The world's most famous atheist and recently ranked the world's most influential thinker, Professor Richard Dawkins.
Science works. Planes fly. Magic carpets and broomsticks don't. Gravity is not a version of the truth. It is the truth.
Whether or not a God exists is actually a scientific question.
I'm prepared to call you she if you like, but to say I am a woman is a debauching of language, and that's where I draw the line.